Hello and welcome to another episode. And this is my first attempt of actually doing a review and my take on a movie. Like, I do reviews, but it's just me. I don't address it as reviews, but this time around it's actually a review, and I'm going to just stick to that. I hope it doesn't take too long, but if it does, please stay with me. It's going to get very interesting. So I have almost finished a 40 episode of a Chinese drama series. I don't know whether we can call it drama though, but I guess that's what they call it, and it's called New Life Begins. I've just finished that, although on YouTube it's not yet finished, so it's still on there. So I will try as much as possible to avoid spoilers so that you can actually really enjoy it. When I saw it though, I usually don't like to watch anything that hasn't been, where the all the episodes are not uploaded. Like, I don't want to have to wait for it, because it affects sometimes my concentration on other things I need to do during the day. So I'm like, okay, when is it out? But if everything is out, my mind is not there, I'll watch it when I have time, and that's about it. So I had already watched the first episode, and I was in it before I realized that it just came out, and it was just 8 episodes. I'm like, oh, why didn't I check? Anyway, so I had to wait every day, and on the days that the episodes are not uploaded, I try very hard to focus on other things, but it's not that easy. So New Life Begins, that's the title in English. Of course, I mean, it probably means something else in Chinese. And if you have been following Chinese drama series, you'll find out that most of the stories are adapted from novels, right? Most of their stories. If you've watched Princess Agents, I think that's the most popular. If you watch Princess Agent, that one too is also adapted from a story, and that would have practically broken the internet. So, because it was very, very popular, everybody was practically on it across the world, but what I heard was there were some copyright issues that made that they couldn't continue with the story, and at this point it's taking so long. I don't think they can gather everybody that was on that story to even do a season 2, because they didn't finish that story. I can assure you. I mean, we all know they didn't finish the story, for anyone who's watched it. So you might have to go and either read the novel, find the novel and read it, or just cut your losses in that area and just move on, or try to move on. Not that it's easy. Anyway, so New Life Begins is what we're talking about. And it's a very, very unique story in the sense that it has so many elements in it. You can see women empowerment a lot in it. Women empowerment was really, really, it was a lot, but it started like a typical male-dominated society, and it involved a story of 9 regions, of whose headquarters, if you may, was Xingshuan. They have a common ending. It is Shuan. There is Jishuan, there is Duchan, there is Muchan, there is Jichan, there is Jin Chan. So about 9 regions. I can't remember all their names right now. And so the headquarters of these 9 regions is Xinchuan, and they formed an alliance that every 3 years there will be a girl of marriage age sent from all the other 8 regions, I believe, to the capital of Xinchuan to marry the princess. Excuse me. To marry the princess, right? Well, stay tuned. It's about to get very interesting. All right. Welcome back. So I took a little break, and so where did we stop? We were talking about the 9 regions whose headquarters was Xinchuan. They actually had an alliance that instead of how do we keep from fighting one another, so they decided that they were going to be sending like Xinchuan was their head. Everyone was independent in their own right, but they signed an alliance of sending girls every 3 years, like I said, into the capital of Xinchuan to marry the princes of Xinchuan. So obviously they agreed, but they're always very reluctant because usually the women that ought to be sent should be princesses as well, but maybe the princesses are not available. They can send anyone else if they like, but I think it has to be the child of someone who works in the court or who is close to as a government worker or something like that, because obviously they need somebody who is literate, not just anybody, but preferably it would be princess, right? But it happened that along the line in the story, the agreement they had with Mo-chan is that Xinchuan was going to send its own princess to marry the prince of Mo-chan. So it wasn't all about Xinchuan. Xinchuan got most of the benefits because all of them pay tribute of some sort to, like, they have a trade with all the other regions in tribute or in commerce that is mutually beneficial, but it's Xinchuan that is the head, so it's the one that gets most of the higher percentage of profits when it comes to these things. Anyway, so the story begins with the procession of the girls from the other 9 regions, because I think it's about 10. Xinchuan is probably not part of the region. I hadn't counted, but it should be 9 regions altogether, But so the procession of the women from all the other regions into the capital, and we saw different forms, it was really, really quite interesting. Some of the princes were eager to see which one they would pick. Some were not even interested at all. And, the story was centered around mostly, everybody else had their own story shared, but the male lead and the female lead were very unusual. They met in an unusual way, The name of this prince, of the male lead, is Prince Jin Zhan, right? So he was like one of the most ignored. He was quite sickly. He had stomach issues, and he was mostly ignored. And he just kept a low profile, And then all of a sudden, he met one of the girls who, got into his kitchen, ate his food unbeknownst to her, and she kind of found him in his kitchen. She didn't know who he was. And then he agreed that, okay, this is somebody he might marry, because he's ambitious, but he doesn't want to marry a woman just because of his ambitions. He just wants to marry somebody who is a regular person, that he doesn't need her connections, the story it's very, very interesting in the sense that because of his wife, he began to become more prominent. She didn't have influence, but they had conversations a lot. And when she's talking about, he asks for her opinion about stuff like, oh, this is what is going on and stuff like, what do you think? And she's like, oh, well, this is how, something similar like that happened. It might not completely relate, but something related happened, where I come from. And then he begins to look at it as an illustration for what is going on. And then he gets inspiration from what she says. Now, she didn't bring much of what you can call political value to him, but she had her own experiences were such that an intelligent man could pick from if he's not condescending, and this particular prince wasn't. So it was like she brought a very simple version of a political issue, and then he looks at it. It makes it easier for him to break it down and come up with practical solutions, because his wife can tell stories about something similar on a micro level. So because it comes from a micro level, it doesn't look as daunting as it used to. Then he looks at, okay, so what did you now do when this happened? And they say, oh, this is how we handled it. And then he now looks like how he's going to bring that into the macro level. So a lot of the reforms he brought into the Nile region's alliance was based on his wife's experiences. Eventually, a lot of things happened. He ended up falling in love with his wife, because of her status, right? If one of the Nile region's women is not from a well-to-do family, royal family, for example, she's a concubine. You understand? She's brought into the family as a concubine, But when it's a princess, of course, a princess will not be a concubine. So the princess now becomes the legal wife. So she was a concubine because of her status. Her status was not the same as her husband. So she was a concubine. But there was this uniqueness about this story in the sense that all the women were friends. There was not much of anybody getting killed. There wasn't much of any conspiracy going on. There were, but it was among the princes, and it wasn't that much. There are some princes. There were less conniving princes than there were the brothers. We saw a lot of brotherly love among the princes that was really, really hilarious and funny. Like, they were always joshing at each other, one another, teasing one another. And when it come to it, they would defend one another as well. And it was the same thing with their women, They became friends, all of them coming from different regions. I think that is also part of it, in the sense that they are in a strange land. And so they're there for one reason. They have a common reason for being there. So I think that is what made it easy for them to become excuse me, friends, right? So they became friends. They talked about their issues. They had to be in royal class, in a classroom where they were taught, how to be a good wife. And it came with flogging sometimes if they didn't do it well, where they beat the underneath of their feet. I think because obviously they didn't want to mark their body by beating them on their back or something, so they beat underneath their feet, which means they may not be able to walk, but at least it doesn't mark their body where it would make them unattractive to their husbands and so on and so forth. So it was a normal classroom where if you don't behave properly, you will get flogged, even as a wife. Like it's really not funny. But that was where they found themselves. They were taught many things: how to cook, how to arrange flowers, and so on and so forth, so the husbands were made aware of the complexities and the difficulties of being a woman in that region because of their wives. And Li Wei, that's the female lead. Li Wei, who is married to the male lead, Prince Zhang, she's quite vocal about how she feels about things. She comes from a region where it's monogamous. So for her, she did not jump into the arms of the prince. She was even biding her time to when she would go back home so that she can find love and marry into a monogamous relationship, because there was no guarantee. In fact, there was little guarantee that she wouldn't remain a concubine. It was a shameful thing to be a concubine, because that is like being a side chick. that is in today's term side chick. There is nothing glamorous about being a side chick right now, and that was what it was in where she comes from. Being a concubine was not much of a big deal in Jingshuan, because, well, it was a big deal when you look at the interpersonal relationships within the family. But when it comes to, nobody will shame you for being a concubine outside, but you have restraints. You don't have the same rights as the legal wife. The legal wife can treat you anyhow, and the husband will just let her vent, because for him it's like, well, you're venting, that's okay. So, but it wasn't a very comfortable place for women to be. But in Li Wei's hometown, it was a disgrace. Like, it was going to be a disgrace for our family as well. Like, what are you, your daughter is a concubine, that sort of thing. And so they were looking forward to her coming back. But of course, her husband was a very good man, very understanding. He gave her a lot of freedom. He protected her. In fact, he became more proactive in the courts because of his wife. He was kind of gotten used to being bullied by, some of his arrogant brothers, especially the crown prince. But it was another different thing to have to watch his wife being bullied. And that was when he began to manifest, in quotes. And people were like, wow, And for me, it just goes to show that a lot of men, they will just take everything as it is. They can be easygoing about a lot of stuff, But the moment they get married, they become very, very protective. They become very territorial. And their full potential as men begins to come out. And that was what happens with the male lead. They really, really, really developed. Now, the female lead, Li Wei, was very, very a happy-go-lucky kind of person. She's very, very expressive, very friendly as well. She's actually the glue of the 9 region brides, like I like to call them. She's a 9 region bride herself. So she's like the glue. She was the one who kind of rallied everybody together, and, everybody was like, what the heck, can we just have some fun? But everybody, at some point, they were just staying on their own, mind their business, go to class, go back home. God help you if your spouse is not that into you either, You guys are just housemates. Like, it was a very lonely time for them until the way just, kind of brought them together for them to have a sister kind of relationship where they chat, they laugh, they share stuff, they talk about things, they eat together, they share their lunch, exchange lunch. It was very, very fun watching these wives become like normal, healthy schoolgirls, having fun and just doing stuff together. And they did a lot of things together. They started businesses together. It was a tough one because in Xinjiang, women didn't do business. There were like two regions. I think it's Jinchuan and Dachuan, where Dachuan is like the female version of what happens in Jinchuan. In Dachuan, a woman is their leader, which is not a bad thing. But the worst part, as far as I'm concerned, is that a woman can have more than one man in her life. They call it a metrolocal husband. Where the man serves the wife in more ways than one. Like, he's the one. So, it's not even funny. But it's also funny at the same time. So, it was a metrolocal husband where you can have more than one husband. You can have a main husband. You can have husbands. Like men have wife and concubine. So, I think they kind of brought the patriarchal and the matriarchal aspect into that story because it was really, really broad. There was an element of feminism in it. Well, that looked like feminism. And I think that is probably what Dachuan stands for. They were very, very reluctant though. Dachuan especially, they were like probably the most reluctant to send their women there because they're used to picking their own husbands, right? And their husbands serving them. So to now have one of their own, a princess at that, she's the sister to the queen there, send her daughter, or rather her sister, her younger sister, of course, there. Now, they had been avoiding it. A lot of regions do avoid it. They give all kind of excuses. We don't have the normal status woman, high status woman to give up. Maybe one gave an excuse. The one that was later married to the male lead as the legal wife, they said the princess was sick. And the reason was because the father wanted the best out of the sons for his daughter. So there was an issue with debt settlement. And this is going to be a spoiler. There was an issue with debt settlement, and the male lead was sent there, and the way he handled things impressed the king there so much that he's like, this is who I found the perfect person to marry my daughter. And that was when he now pushed his daughter forward that, hey, my daughter is now well, and I want her to marry. So he now used that as, since he had leverage, the prince's region is the one who is owing. So they had to, the prince, how do I say this? Xinchuan is the one owing. Jinchuan is now at the place where they can say, this is who I want my daughter to marry. So they were in that kind of space, and it was a very heartbreaking moment for both the female and the male lead because they had developed feelings for each other at that time. He had promised to make her his legal wife, and then all of a sudden, because his potential was spotted, he was chosen. I mean, it was like the best women chose him or were chosen for him. Anyway, it was a very interesting story all through. You have to watch it. Of course, you might have to wait for everything for the episodes to be over, for all the episodes to be uploaded. I think on YouTube it's about maybe episode 24 or thereabout, and it's still going to 40, but I've almost finished. I was on episode 40. I was almost at the tail end. So yeah, it's a story you want to watch. You can learn a lot of things from there. It's like they brought modern times and ancient times together and highlighted all the good, the bad, the ugly, in a very humorous way, but thought-provoking way as well. And at the end of the story, one thing I learned is that every tradition and every culture has its own reason and has its own place in the scheme of things. All right, the lessons I learned from them is that everything is not, when it comes to traditional way, conservative way, liberal way, matriarchy, liberal, women should be allowed to do what they want when they want. I saw a lot of what you can call gaffes there, especially in the place where the women were trying to be free. So it was like they were trampling upon everything else. Some had more than a good enough reason to do that. But I think that at the end, they understood that the system is not entirely rigged against them as women. It's not completely all patriarchal stuff. I think they just brought a better understanding of what these things are, because to go without restraints as well is not exactly freedom. The rules, understand the rules, why they're there, right? Instead of just bucking it because you feel that you want to be, they all had to come to understanding before they even fulfilled their dreams. They had to come to a better understanding of the restraints they were under. For one of them who wanted to be a female official, and, she had to come to the understanding of why her father was against it. It wasn't because her father looked down on her. It was because the father was afraid that his daughter was too much like him. And then he wanted his daughter, and he knew that being a leader is not easy. And you know how men can be about their daughter. They're very, very soft-hearted about their daughter. They don't want any stress for their daughter. So when his daughter was showing too much interest in politics, he was terrified. But men don't show their fear the same way women do. We women, we scream when we are afraid. Men bellow when they are, like they thunder when they are scared. And you see, they exhibit it as anger and disdain and disapproval, but it's actually fear, And until she had a heart-to-heart conversation with her father, it took a lot for them to get to that point, because the father was like, I'm going to force you to pick peace. And she's like, no, you can't force me. This is what I want. The father had to concede, of course, but they had to have a conversation, about everything. And at some point she was crying and said, Father, why didn't you tell me? And he's like, well, maybe your father is not that good about sharing his feelings, though. The fact that that your father sees himself in you is a compliment, and that he's scared because he's like, he knows the stress he goes through as a leader, and he's like, he looks at his daughter who seems to have all these tendencies, and he's like, I can't have my daughter going through all of this. She should be, just lounging and being pampered. That is what he wants for his daughter. To be pampered, to be cared for her to be served. Not for her to be serving the people, So it wasn't about trying to suppress his daughter's talent. Right? So having that conversation, it was very, very important. And I'm glad that all of them came to terms with the fact that all the rules that they felt was in place to keep women indoors and submissive to their husbands was actually put in place to protect them. Yes, did some people take undue advantage of it? Of course, they did. Which ended up making it look bad. But here is the thing. It's like how people blame religion for everything that is wrong with the world. And I'm saying religion, people embody religion. That's what I say, like, people embody religion. If there is no religion, people will find something else to get what they want. If they can't use patriarchy, they will use religion. If they can't use religion, they will use fear. And what is what they use? Fear. Fear of punishment. So religion is just turning a belief system into a tool. It's when you turn a belief system into a tool that it becomes a religion. A tool of oppression and suppression. But that was not the original intent, because at the end of the day, when you look at the Bible, for example, women were suppressed, but it was not God's will that they be suppressed. There aren't that many cultures where women had inheritance. But in Israel, women could have inheritance. But one thing I noticed was men, needed to protect their families. So yes, they needed inheritance. But at the same time, if a woman shows interest, that yes, she has leadership qualities, and she's interested in governing her own affairs, she's given that chance. It happened in Exodus, I believe. I think it was Exodus. Yeah, either Exodus or Leviticus, where it was only women. Their father had just all of them, and they were all girls. And they came out and said, does that mean we won't have inheritance because we are all girls? That we are all the offspring of our father, and as his offspring, we should be entitled to his property. And instead of the leader to shut them down, he did not shut them down. And I think the reason might be simple. Apart from the kind of person Moses was, he was the adopted son. I don't know why I said daughter. He was the adopted son of the princess of Egypt. Right? And maybe he's seen his adoptive mom handle a lot of court, palace, and political affairs. And he understood that women had influence. He wasn't used to, his mother was not oppressed in any way or something like that. So maybe he's seen that in his mom, in his adoptive mom. Maybe. And so when that came up, he was like, hold on a second. Let me go and ask God. And so he went and said, God, this is what it is. And God said, I know what happened there, and they are right. That's what God said, that they were right. Give them an inheritance, but there is a caveat to it. They have to marry from their father's clan. And what is the reason for that? The reason is, if they marry from outside their tribe, because there were 12 tribes in Israel. Now, if they married outside their tribe, what will happen is that if they inherit their father's property, the land would transfer to the other tribe. So it will now become a political issue, and then eventually a war might break out among the tribes, because then some greedy men will now see that as an opportunity to start acquiring their fellow tribes' land to themselves by marrying the women. So to cut off that flow of where your one tribe's land moves to another, like, no, this tribe owns this land. Anybody who goes out of this tribe will not take you will not take the land with you. So if you still want to maintain your inheritance, you have to marry from your father's tribe. However, if the person you choose to marry is from outside the tribe, you have to forfeit your inheritance, because at the end of the day, it belongs to your father, and the land also belongs to the tribe. So you cannot be moving, you cannot start something that would now cause war among the tribes, because one tribe is marrying other people's daughters so that they can steal their land, in quote. And then now becomes, that is how land disputes begin, right? And the girls were like, they picked people from their father's tribe and they kept their inheritance and had their husbands. They chose their husbands. God said the man they choose. The men they choose. So they chose their husbands. God didn't choose their husbands for them, and they had that. Now, how many cultures would say the same? Now, does that mean that some men will not get up one day and try as much as possible to make sure that women don't have inheritance? Of course, that could happen. So what am I saying? This is one story that I like the way they explain things. If you follow the story closely, you have a better understanding about why things are the way they are. And I saw a lot of consequences, because in the quest for independence of these women, they caused their husbands a lot of problems. It was their husbands who was running around trying to figure things out. And I was kind of upset about that. Like, your husbands have been lying low all this while, and you just had to go and put them on the spot. So the men had two options. They either had to find a way to change the system to favor their wives, or they have to command their wives, in quote, to shut down their business and stay at home. But the men they loved their wives and they appreciated their wives, and they're like, my wife should have to do what she wants to do. She's not committing a crime or anything like that, And so because of that, they began to work towards reforms. And it was a politically strenuous time for the husbands. And the person who carried the whole weight of it was the male lead. He had other brothers whose wives were doing business together with his own wife, but he was the one who carried the whole weight of the whole thing, because he was like the smartest of them all, so to speak. He was politically savvy, economically savvy, like he was just a natural leader, but he would rather not have put himself in that situation. But now that he has found himself in that situation, he's like, well, maybe it's time this thing changed. And he had to come up with a system that he understood why these things were there. You understand? He understood that it wasn't to suppress women, but it so happened that these laws were suppressing women. The idea was not, let us create laws to suppress women. Is that the disadvantage of it was that women who had the ability or the interest to work outside their homes could not do that. Women could not pick their own husbands. But at the end of the day, if there was not a marriage of alliance, the women will still suffer, because there will be war. And who are the people who suffer most in the war? Children and women. So they are like, the worst fate for a woman could be to be a captive of war and become a sex slave. At least with this marriage of alliance, they are with a man, and the man is the one responsible for them, and there is no war. As long as there is no war, they felt that should not be too big of a price for the women to pay. They themselves have to marry women who they don't know themselves, so it's not as if it is all rosy for the men as well, right? So but it so happened that, so the women want to step out of their homes and achieve things, and they couldn't because of the law, and they took it personal. They were very, very emotional about it, that, they're just restraining us. We have a right. We can do things like men do. Yeah, you can do things like men do, but are you going to try to understand that This whole thing was to prevent a war, or you don't care. So they were very, very impatient, and it just goes to show that everything has its advantages and disadvantages. But for a very intelligent man, they found a way to balance things. The male lead found a way to, say, okay, I understand that the reason why this was in place is for this, that. But there are other ways we can form alliances that doesn't have to be a marriage alliance. So this is what we are going to do. He didn't just barge into court, which is what the women would have loved to do, but they all say it, make their husbands, badger their husbands about it, carry a pouty face around the house about it, that they're not allowed to do this and do that. I'm like, why are you telling your husbands they didn't form the law? Your fathers and the lords of your land put this thing together. Why are you now taking it out on your husbands? You know what I mean? And so their husband felt we have to do something about this. So at the end of the day, for women to be free, the men still had to be involved in that. They had to think. The women didn't come up with the bright idea of, okay, how do we maintain an alliance among the regions without us being there? Without us having to marry men we don't know. For them, it was just about, I am not allowed to do this. I am not allowed to do that. I saw a lot of selfishness in there, and it made me realize that men who are married to feminists, they're not having it that easy. They're not having it that easy, unfortunately. But since they love their wives, they make things possible for them. And I think that eventually the women had a better understanding of why those rules were, that it wasn't entirely, that it had its advantages as well as its disadvantages. That instead of just focusing, that they have been focusing on disadvantages, but there are advantages. And the female lead who was bucking the system, by the time she got her independence, she could not rest anymore. She was all over the place. She will work at the decks and then sleep there. I wouldn't say she enjoyed the job, but I think the reality of there is responsibility that comes with you wanting to do what you want. You have to maintain that position. And it was tough, almost tough for her to maintain that position. But, her husband loves her, so they kind of found a way to have a family time in the midst of so much work to do. She had businesses that was bringing in dividends for her and the other and her other 9 region brides. And so I think they named the businesses after the 9 regions, actually, because that was where the inspiration came from. But she had to do a lot of work. She had to go through a lot of training, right? She had to go through a lot of training. It was strenuous. So I'm glad that they took us through the process of what it takes to be a leader. It's not just enough to say, I have a right to work outside the home and be a CEO. Well, you do, but you have to maintain that position. And that's why some women, they get to the peak of their career, they're doing well, they're earning a lot, and they just retire and decide to be full-time housewives and moms. Because they're like, no, I'm not doing this. Because it's a lot of work. A lot of work. On her husband's birthday, she had to go somewhere on business. Can you imagine? And then the vehicle, let's call it vehicle. It wasn't vehicle, but a vehicle is something that conveys you from one point to the other. So their vehicle, even if it was a horse and a cat, it's still vehicle. Or horse and carriage rather. And it broke down along the way. Her husband's birthday party has already started. She was not there. And she was like, let me quickly go and do this and then come back. She had to pick the horse and ride back there to catch up. She had to ask the man to unhitch one of the horses for her so that she can ride. Only for us to find out later that, never mind. You will see for yourself. And I was like, understanding is important. We shouldn't always focus on the disadvantage. We should ask questions and look at the roots rather than the fruits. Look at the roots rather than the fruits. I am not against women having freedom to do what they want. But what I'm against is you not wanting to have a conversation about why these things are and allowing change to come gradually. I'm kind of not, making demands of people like you brought up this law, you must change it. We brought up this law for everybody. Do you understand? Okay, so maybe you are the ones who are getting you don't get to be in our position as men, but they all had to learn that being in a position of authority is not all that rosy either. Yes, you are called the boss, but that means you may not eat throughout the day because you're looking through documents upon documents upon documents. That means not having time for your loved ones as well. But they managed to create that balance, and we're able to see how it's possible for a woman and a man who are both in positions of authority and positions of influence, where a lot is expected of them. They're responsible for a lot of people, and the positions do not break them up, but they actually find a way to rest in the middle of a very, very tight and hectic schedule, and at the same time have time for each other. It's a well-rounded story that I think you need to watch. I could have gone into details, but I think I've gone into more than enough details just to whet your appetite, and you get to see all sides of the story when it comes to patriarchy, and the combination of both simultaneously, right? So yeah, I'll just put a pin on that for now. So go check it out and let me know what you think in the comment section. Remember, guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it flows the issues of life. Shalom.